organisation.
If the Scottish Government wants the Scottish people to vote for independence in a referendum, why is it going out of its way to alienate so many Scots in the Christian and Muslim communities?
I don't think this comes into play in terms of the referendum at all, because the referendum, as we know, is going to be in the second half of the Parliament. This, whatever happens with this, will be ancient history by that point, and people aren't going to vote for the future in the country on the basis of whether or not gay marriage is allowed.
The rally outside the Parliament yesterday brought together those from the Catholic Church, the Church of Scotland and the Muslim community. The First Minister has indicated he favours change. Not all his MSPs agree. Could his party split?
For a split within a party to be meaningful, you need a big beast within that political party to be heading up that faction, and there isn't that at the moment. He's got some trouble on his back benches, but I don't think it's anything that's going to be keeping Alex Salmond awake at night. There's nobody using this as part of a wider agenda to try and damage him or damage the Scottish Government in terms of the Cabinet. So I think it's a row that he will not have wanted to have blundered into, but it's not one that's going to be lasting or meaningful.
But it is only a consultation. Time yet for the government to extricate itself from a troubled match.
Now, as you will have seen in the film, one of the leading lights in the campaign Scotland for Marriage is the former SNP leader, Gordon Wilson. He's also chairman of SOLAS, the Centre for Public Christianity. Earlier this evening, I asked him for his response to the Church of Scotland's decision to oppose gay marriage.
It's very welcome. The Church of Scotland obviously had to take some time to think things out, but it's now adding its weight behind the campaign, which is rolling very satisfactorily at this stage.
And what do you think the Scottish Government should do now?
Well, it depends which way you look at it. As a professional politician of the past, my view is that they should never have got into this hole in the first place. Whether they were blinded by electoral success or not, I don't know. The worry for me, apart from the main issue of same-sex marriage not being compatible with marriage itself, is that from the SNP aspect, with a referendum and independence coming, they are busy alienating voters. And it's not the time to do it. It's never the time in politics to do it, but certainly not on the eve of a major event like a referendum on independence, which is, or used to be, the main aim of the SNP.
So you think supporting this is a bad move for the SNP politically?
I would have thought so, judging from the information I've received, also judging by the reaction from the general public, especially from those who are married at the present time. What they're proposing is unacceptable and is alienating them from support.
You seem to suggest it could even put in jeopardy their campaign for independence.
Well, the object of a referendum is that you're going to win it. If you're not going to win it, you don't hold it. And in the case that the government is pledged to go ahead, if so, you have to play your cards with finesse. You have to make sure that you take along and persuade the maximum number of people. On a peripheral issue of this in terms of demand, where there are only, what is it, 3,300 civil partnerships in 6 years compared with 175,000 marriages. They're not doing anything except to aid the cause, the doubtful cause of political correctness.
But are you seriously suggesting that people feel strongly enough on this that by supporting same-sex marriage, the SNP is committing a sort of political suicide on its main ambition of independence?
I'm not saying they're going to commit political suicide, but it's quite obvious that on the polls that already exist, that the SNP is going to have to work full out in order to win a majority in the referendum. Every vote lost through alienation on this issue is a vote that could be lost in the referendum itself. Now, that is something that doesn't affect me, because independence for Scotland is very dear to my heart, and I shall vote for it regardless. But there are other people to whom it may have less importance compared with either their faith, their beliefs, or just revulsion at the thought that the marriage that they thought they'd entered into between a man and a woman was now going to be tainted in some way.
If I were Alex Salmond, I think what I'd say to you is this, that, look, I respect your point of view in this, however, opinion polls show that a majority, quite a substantial majority of people in Scotland are in favour of same-sex marriage. So the idea that somehow or other I, Alex Salmond, am jeopardising an independence referendum by supporting it is nonsense.
Well, Alex knows, of course, that I have considerable experience in running political campaigns, and this one is just beginning to run. And already it's attracted a lot of support, bringing in the Muslims, the Catholic Church, the Church of Scotland, the Free Church, the Baptist Union, and also outside the churches there are people who are not churchy or may describe themselves as Christian but are not completely dedicated to that. They just feel that this is an improper way of going about it. Now, Alex is a consummate politician, and I wouldn't attempt in any way to outguess him. But I would think he would have to think twice. For example, a lot of the support for same-sex marriages in the one poll that I have seen is shallow. It comprises people who may not be married. It comprises many people who may not intend to get married. But I can tell you this, that amongst those who are married and disagree with same-sex marriage being redefined to encompass marriage as a whole between same-sex couples and opposite-sex couples, as the government charmingly describes it, it's a much deeper. People will feel more deeply and they will vote, whereas many of the other people who say, oh yes, we're all in favour of it, they won't bother to come out and vote at all.
But the other danger, again, if I were Alex Salmond, is that David Cameron has made it quite clear that he intends to legislate for same-sex marriage in England. So in a sense what Alex Salmond is proposing to do is a catch-up measure. Now, he's incurred your anger by choosing to go this way, but if he had chosen to go the other way, I mean, he was equally vulnerable. It would have looked as if Scotland was a backward country which wasn't doing what many people see as a progressive piece of legislation that was happening in England.
Yes, progressive or not, is it? It's political correctness. I've already specified it affects a tiny majority of people, but the implications for society are greater. I mean, what will happen to marriage if, say, heterosexual couples decide not to get married because they regard it as tainted? If there's a flight away from marriage, as we know it, for the bringing up of children, then society can suffer. And it does not appear that the government has done a what-if analysis to see what the impact will be. So in short, your message to Mr Salmond would be change course and do it now? Well, if you want independence, change course and do it in a consummately clever way that you usually do things.
All right, Gordon Wilson, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now by the writer and commentator Katie Grant, and from Edinburgh by the political columnist and biographer Alex Salmond, David Torrance. Well, first of all, David Torrance, what's your assessment of what Gordon Wilson is saying? I mean, is it a political threat to the SNP, do you think?
I don't think it is in practical terms. As Lorraine Davison said in your film, it's very small beer indeed. What Gordon Wilson is doing is very cleverly playing on fears within the SNP that annoying people, and this will annoy some people, potentially puts them off voting yes to either independence or Devo Max. And there is an argument within the SNP that they ought to be closing down any potential areas of annoyance, and this would be one of them. They've already closed them down in relation to the monarchy. There's been a slight shift on NATO and in other areas. So that's what Gordon Wilson is doing. He's aware this debate is going on, and he's playing on that quite effectively, I think. But you don't think he would have really much support for what he's saying within the SNP, or do you? Well, there's clearly some support. I mean, John Mason, his motion, which started this whole row, I suppose, and also another SNP MSP. So there is a degree of support there. It is not at a critical mass at this moment. Right. What's your take on this, Katie?
Well, I'd say it was unlikely to get to a critical mass because of the way the language that's been used. I think many Catholics will have been quite shocked by the Cardinal's language, the Cardinal who also is in this Scotland for Marriage movement. You know, the idea that we all now want to talk about taint, and those of us who are married, among who myself, that we might suddenly rush away from our marriages because we feel they're tainted, this talk about revulsion. This is old language, and I don't think it's at all attractive to young people who might, in a way, feel that they don't wish for gay marriage, but would certainly be put off by the language that's being used. So I think Gordon Wilson and Cardinal O'Brien are attacking it from the wrong angle, with the wrong kind of language.
But if you're saying they're wrong to do this, how do we explain the fact that all the main churches and the Muslim community all seem now signed up for this?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying the case shouldn't be argued. They're quite right to argue it. I mean, how could they not? This is part of, particularly for the Catholics, it's part of, you know, it's part of what they are. So, of course, they're right to argue. What I'm saying is that the language used to argue their case is very alienating to a whole lot of people, particularly young people who might very well vote for independence, and they're certainly not going to be put off voting for independence because of this issue, and equally well will feel very uncomfortable with some of the language that's being used, even if they might agree with the premise.
Right, so even in your view, even if the churches got their act together and argued a case in the way you would like them to argue
yes,
it, it's unlikely to put people off voting either one way or the other.
No, I don't think it would. But I think the language that's being used at the moment by the Scotland for Marriage movement is quite alienating in itself. I don't really see how they hope to take this forward.